Hello and welcome to the Minutes to Win It NBA podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Jason Gilbo at JGilbo11. And after a 10-game slate on a Monday, now we are rewarded with a 4-game slate on a Tuesday. So more playable slates, I guess, but now we got a span of 2 out of 3 days with 4 or less games because Thursday only has 3. So although the sites were obviously anticipating a nice slate today because there's still some nice prize pools. You got DraftKings has a huge one. Fantasy F has that big 50-50. So there's plenty of money to be made. Even the FanDuel ones, I mean, I think it's $20K for first in the shot. So it doesn't seem like a 4-game slate from that angle. So you're going to have to get creative, obviously, in these GPPs with not many options. But we'll talk about the guys that are out, injuries, suspensions, things like that. So Rajon Rondo. Doesn't really matter why, but he's suspended for tonight. That's a different argument for a different place. But with him being out, obviously Darren Collison going to get a bump. You don't really think there's going to be much of a bump for DeMarcus Cousins, who already has a ridiculously high Russell Westbrook-esque usage rate. But Darren Collison, he's been good enough. I guess he's kind of like the Patrick Beverley type. When he's getting minutes, he's not a guy that's going to give you a lot of peripheral stats. Kind of, I guess, in that sense, he's kind of opposite of Patrick Beverley. But you just expect he's going to get you 25 to 30. He's a great catch gameplay. But on a 4-game slate, I don't mind avoiding him in some GPPs because you imagine he's going to be maybe the most highly owned player on the slate tonight.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. And I mean, if you had to choose, who do you think is going to be more highly owned, Jameer Nelson or Darren Collison?
I'd say Collison. I don't know. It'll probably be pretty close. I'm sure that in cash games, there's going to be a lot of just, and on FanDuel especially, Collison, Nelson together. But I think, Nelson isn't the guy that's going to go out and usually put up huge numbers, especially on a back-to-back at his age. But, people may be looking for Collison, hoping he's got more upside tonight after Nelson was good last night. I saw tweets, people hating on him after his 25, 26-point game. I mean, that's exactly what you want. I mean, that's perfect. So, yeah. I mean, in cash games, I think going with both is a perfectly fine option.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, just because point guards, I mean, there's not much up top. I mean, you have Isaiah Thomas and Ricky Rubio, and, I mean, they're not really expensive either. There's no one over 8,000.
Yeah, and, I mean, as far as those guys, I think I would rather have Isaiah Thomas. He's had a really nice floor. He's got upside. I mean, not massive, not James Harden type upside, but I mean, this is a guy who's got double-digit assists in back-to-back games. He's been playing a ton of minutes now. Was kind of stuck in those low 30s at first, but especially in a game against Cleveland at home, tough matchup for the bigs, of course, down low. The Cleveland's been pretty good against power forwards and centers, even though Kevin Love's not a great defender. But you got to imagine that a guy like Isaiah Thomas, really the most consistent scorer on the team, you're going to need him to take advantage of his good matchup against that backcourt, and if they're going to win that game.
Yeah. If I'm paying up for point guard, Thomas is definitely going to be my favorite option.
Yeah, absolutely. And then looking at some other guys, we've got Jordan Clarkson, who did sit out the last 2 games. Looks like he's going to play tonight. So that's going to kind of take away a little bit from D'Angelo Russell. Either way, just not a situation that you love. Other options, of course, we didn't actually mention it, but Mudiay is out again, so that's why Jameer Nelson's still just one of the best value plays on the board. Of course, both the Milwaukee, Jared Bayless, Gurius Vasquez, both those guys still out. Matthew Dellavedova sat out practice with back soreness a couple days ago. He's expected to play, but you can monitor that situation to see, because then you'd see bumps for guys like Mo Williams and maybe Iman Shumpert. I'm not sure what his minutes are going to be like today, but definitely monitor that as well. A lot of uncertainty at point guard tonight.
Yep, definitely agree with you there. And another one, Patrick Beverley, sitting under 5K, still getting it done around 25 fantasy points. And, of course, another great spot for him against Sacramento. I mean, that game should probably be the highest scoring game of the night.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you look at the odds, and it's not even close. I think it's up to, let's see, I think it was 220 last I saw. Yeah, 220 now. Sure. Number 2 game at 204.5 with Denver and Minnesota. So definitely that's the game you want to get yourself tons of exposure to. Shooting guards tonight, there's a couple guys that really stand out. Of course, James Harden last night. You know that you're a really good option when you score 40 FanDuel points last night and everyone's disappointed in you, James Harden. But that's pretty much his floor. I mean, we did see that bad game against Brooklyn where he just shot poorly and then just stopped shooting for the rest of the game. But really, his floor is right around 40 points. And on back-to-backs this season, he's actually been really good. And with plenty of value, especially at the point guard position, you can get James Harden, you can get DeMarcus Cousins or whatever other big name you want, and it's really not going to be tough to do. So, I mean, it just makes sense to get James Harden. But if on the middle tier guys, I mean, Will Barton's the guy that I really want. He's been great recently. He's shooting the ball well. He's getting a ton of minutes. Moutier, of course, out. He's not a high usage guy, but I mean, he just takes good shots, and the guy just has he has a great floor, and he's got a nice ceiling too.
Yeah, he's been playing really well defensively too. I mean, 3 steals, 2, 4 in the last 3 games there, and got 9 rebounds in 3 of the last 4 games as well. So I mean, he's kind of doing a bit of everything, which is nice to see out of the shooting guard spot, where usually a lot of those guys are really scoring dependent. So I definitely agree with you. I mean, Will Barton's my favorite guy that's not James Harden.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Giannis, the Greek freak over here, he's in a good spot too, coming off a triple-double against the Warriors. He's a guy that doesn't have monster upside, but relative to his price, and when you consider the fact that shooting guard is not a very deep position at all today, he's a guy that I think is good. He's well suited for both cash games and tournaments. Played 43 minutes each of the last 2 games, but obviously you aren't expecting that. But in a game against the Lakers, who are the worst defensive team in all of basketball, you gotta love a guy like him who doesn't have to score actual points to produce. So a night like tonight, he makes for a pretty good cash game play if you went maybe with him and Barton instead of Harden. If you're not going to pay up, or you want to pay up elsewhere, I think that's a fine way to go.
Yeah, if you're building a balanced lineup, I mean, Giannis is kind of the way to go. Pretty safe floor in this matchup. I mean, the only real downside is he gets into foul troubles at times. So, I mean, that's my only concern. But otherwise, I mean, he's a pretty safe option.
Yeah. A couple other guys to look at here. Kevin Martin's a guy who's been playing well recently. 40, 41, and 25 minutes in his last 3. Scored 37, 22, and 19 points. Certainly a GPP-only option, but for a guy that does have big upside, I mean, he had 43 points against the Lakers, 31 against Denver. He's under 5K on both sites, so I think he's at once again, we said a weak position. He's a guy that I'm definitely feeling good about throwing into some GPPs because he does have that low floor, but as we know, he's a streaky shooter, so when he gets it going, he can definitely fill it up quickly.
Yeah, and if you look at the last 3 games, I mean, he's really been shooting the ball pretty well and shooting the ball a ton. So, I mean, at his price, he's a pretty high-volume shooter. That's a pretty good one to get exposure to.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if you're looking at other guys, there's just not a whole lot that really stands out there. I mean, O.J. Mayo's price starting to creep up. He's been good enough. I mean, he's more of a cash game play than a GPP play, but even then, I mean, there's just plenty of other value elsewhere that I just don't want to go out of my way to play him. A guy that you had pointed out when we were talking earlier, Gary Harris, returned from his concussion and has now played 44 and 40 minutes his last 2 games. Not extremely productive, 13.9 and 28.9 fantasy points. You don't really expect him to play 40 minutes again tonight, but facing against a Minnesota team that has been, I guess, about average defensively, if we hear and we know that he's going to see big minutes, which he should still see minutes in the 30s, I think he's an okay filler, but not a guy that I feel great about, though.
No, speaking of scoring dependent, it's Gary Harris. I mean, that's the kind of player he is. And you look at these 40-minute performances, and he only has 2 rebounds, 1 assist, and 21 points. So he really needs those minutes to be productive. So that's really the concern with him there is fantasy points per minute. He's not a great option.
Yeah, absolutely. And then moving over to small forward, we've got LeBron James at the top. We've seen a few big games from him. Game against Portland, 57.5 FanDuel. Game against New Orleans, 56.4. But he's been right in the mid-40s for the most part. So obviously he's a tremendous cash game play. Still a guy with big-time upside, of course, in your tournaments. So you're not going to be able to fit all 3 of the superstars in tonight, more than likely. But if you want to go James, I think he'll probably be the lower owned of the 3 of Harden, James, and Cousins, at least in tournaments, because he usually is with those guys. So I think he's a fine option, but I just think that those other 2 guys still have more upside because LeBron just hasn't had to do a ton.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of depends on how this game goes. If Boston really jumps out ahead and they force LeBron to get into that takeover mode, then you're going to see the upside. But, I mean, it's only happened a few times this season. So, I mean, I rather have him in cash games, I guess, if you want to pair him with Harden. But tournaments, I'll probably look elsewhere. Yeah,
I like that. And then Danilo Gallinari, of course, a guy who's been very consistent, was playing big minutes, only played 32 last night. Obviously, the game was it was kind of a blowout. It was really weird at the end. I mean, it was an 11-point game, I think, with 2 minutes left. All of a sudden, Houston cuts it to 2. And then I was praying for overtime because I had a ton of both sides. But, I mean, Gallinari's had a nice floor. You don't love his price because he just hasn't shown a lot of upside relative to that price. But I mean, if you're looking for safety on a 4-game slate, I think he's a really fine option.
Yeah. I mean, Will Barton tossed it. I forgot who's. I think it was Trevor Ariza's shoe into the stands, and that's what turned it. I mean, then the blowout was gone.
Yep. Oh, and then Ariza was mad, and everyone else is mad. That's when James Harden decided he wanted to score some points late, but once it was a little bit too late, I guess. Another guy, a guy who could be interesting in tournaments tonight. He really, once again, has hardly shown the upside. Had a huge game against Milwaukee a couple weeks ago, but outside of that, he's just been more of a cash game option. Rudy Gay, obviously with Rajon Rondo out, I think if you're looking for upside between him and Collison, obviously he's much more expensive. I think he's the safer bet to actually have upside than Darren Collison, because Collison's not the guy that's going to go out and try to take over the game offensively. He's just going to be the game manager. He's going to be the Alex Smith of the NBA, and he's going to go out and just pass the ball and defer. And, I mean, Gay and Cousins are going to be the guys that are going to take over the scoring.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I think Gay is going to be the guy who's second behind Cousins, and I mean, which is kind of why we don't think Collison's going to have tremendous upside tonight, because it's just probably going to be Gay and Cousins. It's just going to be that type of show. And another guy, small forward, Omri Caspi, has just been really consistent in that 5K range, and he's a guy who just sits around 25 to 30 fantasy points. And I guess in a matchup like this, he does have pretty decent upside for his price, just because Houston's defense is god awful.
Yeah, they just do not care on defense. And other options, there's a couple of them. I mean, Trevor Ariza, a guy who dealt with an injury. We see people insulting him on Twitter because he hurt himself. So don't be that guy, once again, to reiterate that. But Ariza did play 42 minutes last night. So you're obviously not expecting 42 minutes, especially on a back-to-back. But he's a guy that, another one of those guys that doesn't have to score a lot of real points to pay off. So I think he makes for a fine cash game play against, a Sacramento team that, another one of those teams that's just not a good defensive team at all.
Yeah, I really like Ariza. I mean, he does have upside if that shot's falling, because he does grab rebounds. He's, a pretty good defensive player because he grabs a ton of steals. So I think in that range, I mean, he's got a ton of upside for, I mean, basically not too expensive either.
Yeah, absolutely. And then as we look at power forward, this might be the thinnest position tonight. I mean, you got Kevin Love up top facing off against Boston. He's the guy who's been kind of the focal point of the offense for the Cavs. Similar production to LeBron a lot of nights. Usually like 8 to 10 less fantasy points, but for 2,000 to 3,000 less. So he's a guy that you consider here. He's a fine cash game play. Hasn't had a monster upside for the most part. And I mean, he's a guy, if you want the safety, he's about the only safe option you've got at power forward. You got a lot of other volatility behind him. So behind him you got Kenneth Faried, who his minutes fluctuate, 36 and 38, then only played 20 last night despite being really, really productive. So I'm not sure if he insulted the coach. I don't know what he did, but I mean, 11 and 9 in 20 minutes, and then he just doesn't see the court. I don't. That's the thing about Kenneth Faried. I just don't understand it. You can't rely on the guy.
Yeah, I mean, that's why it's just scary. But, I mean, definitely in play for tournaments, I guess, just because he is productive when he's on the court. I mean, if he does get 30-plus minutes, he's going to be probably in the 30s for fantasy points just because that's how he's been this season. But, I mean, power forward's pretty ugly. You got to like DK because they have DeMarcus Cousins there at power forward, so that's nice. And he'd obviously be the top option, but, I mean, there's not a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you got Jabari Parker, who's finally seeing a decent amount of minutes. 36, 32, 31, 25, and 28 his last couple. Definitely a volatile guy because they're not forcing him into big minutes. Obviously, just back from the injury from last season. So he's a guy that's probably your best bet in that 5K range because you got Terrence Jones, got poked in the eye or whatever that was last night. Modi Yunus, who had a good game last night but still isn't going to see huge minutes. You don't expect him to score 19 actual points in 22 minutes again. So really, the only safe option you've got around that price seems like Jabari Parker, but even his safety is more of like a 18 to 20 point fantasy floor.
Yeah, I definitely agree with there. And I mean, you would really like Julius Randle in this situation if he was actually getting minutes and starting, but that's not the case. And he's basically just turning into a Kenneth Faried where maybe he gets 30 minutes, maybe he gets 22. I don't know.
Yeah, and it seemed like, I mean, the one game recently after 28, 24, 21 minutes trending down right before the Minnesota game, is where we hear Byron Scott saying, well, he's not going to see big minutes. He's going to stay in the low 20s. And then I don't play him. I take him out of my lineups. And then what does he do? Play 33 minutes and go 20 and 12. So, I mean, there's a reason why the Lakers are the worst team. Well, Sixers might have an argument there, but I think the Lakers are the worst team in the NBA. And you wonder why, as a terrible team, you're not trying to get your young, talented players more minutes. It's baffling, but it's a situation that I don't want to invest a lot of money in either.
Yeah.
All right, moving on here to center. There are some options here. Of course, DeMarcus Cousins, you mentioned he's a power forward on DraftKings. He's a center on FanDuel, still under 10K at 9,800. And, I mean, another one of those guys where 23, 12, and 6 and 27, 11, and 2 are kind of disappointing for him with his salary. So great games his last two. He does still have that monster upside, of course. And with Dwight Howard on the back-to-back, he'll obviously see some of him, but you expect his minutes to be cut down to the low 20s tonight at the most. So won't see a ton of him. And I mean, like you mentioned earlier, Houston, they don't care on defense. Not a single one of these players has played good defense this year. And you just don't worry about the matchup, especially if he's facing off against, a Clint Capella or a Terrence Jones, if those guys even play tonight. There's really just not much resistance down low. And Cousins, first game this year against this team, fouled out. Played just, I think it was 26 minutes. So definitely a guy that if people are going to look at the game logs, they're going to say, well, he only had 25, 26 minutes last time. But, I mean, he did foul out. You don't expect that to happen again tonight. I think he's going to be lower owned than he rightfully should be tonight.
Yeah, and like you were mentioning earlier, I mean, the usage rate is just through the roof. So, I mean, this guy, he may have the highest usage rate on the slate tonight, I think.
Yeah, I think he does because Harden's at, I think, 32 and some change. I think Cousins is 34.
34, yeah. So, I mean, you're getting a high usage guy here, and I just think in a great matchup. Yeah, Cousins has been kind of mediocre for the price, I guess you could say, lately. But I mean, tonight I think he definitely goes off.
Yeah, this is definitely a good spot for him. Only a few other guys that I'm really considering here. I'll see who you're looking at. Obviously, Greg Monroe against the Lakers, worst defensive efficiency team, third worst rebounding team, allowing a ton of fantasy points to centers recently. Everything pointing towards a nice Greg Monroe game tonight also.
Yep, really like Greg Monroe. I think he's the best cash game center, especially on DK, just because there's no Cousins there. And he's still really cheap. I mean, 7,100 on DK, that's pretty good for a guy who's just been a lock for double-doubles lately, averaging 17 and 11 in the last 6 games. So just a really solid option. And, last time he showed that upside finally, but now he gets the Lakers offense or defense that upside should be there again.
Yeah, and then the last two guys to consider here, really, it's the Minnesota big men. Karl Anthony Towns for your upside, Gorgie Jang for your floor and your minutes. Kind of been a fluid situation there where we've seen Towns have his big upside and vice versa with Dang. Obviously, they said it was a lot due to the pick and roll and his play in the pick and roll, and I get that. But I'll have exposure to both guys tonight.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great matchup for both of them, and you got to like Towns' upside, and still the price is pretty cheap too. So it's always just a worry because he could be in that 25-minute range, and he's productive, but he needs minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. So that'll wrap things up here for us for this short slate. Find us on DF Cafe, on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out the rest of our content at dailyfantasycafe.com.